Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts, Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in the space. This week is episode 14 of season 3. We're going to have a discussion around Azure Private Link, a service to secure access to Azure resources via an Azure virtual network. Hey, Alan, how's your week been?
Hey, Sam. It's been an interesting one. How about yours?
Yeah, I haven't really had much exciting happen to me compared to you. Alan, do you want to spill the beans to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So over the weekend, beginning of the month, I got awarded most valuable professional from Microsoft in security. So I'm now a Microsoft MVP in security.
That is amazing. Well done, Alan. That is unbelievable. And what do you what do you think sort of the biggest sort of contributing factor to the MVP? What do you think sort of secured it for you?
So I think there's definitely a couple of things, but one of them is definitely doing this podcast and helping everyone else that listens to this to gain insights or learn from us. So that's the whole point of this podcast, and we'll continue to do it, won't we? So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that from what I can tell, I have obviously haven't been through that process. Is the most important part is your input and in what you give back to the community, right? So producing content on a on a schedule like we do, and reaching the people that we do is definitely important from that perspective.
yeah, definitely. And the other part to it is probably some of the product community side of things that we do, the customer connect programs, things like that, to help give back to or give feedback to and influence products in private previews. So
Yeah,
help
well,
help Microsoft, help the community, and make sure I'm got lots of knowledge in that and keeping up with it all, which is the fun and difficult part at the same time.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, that's where this podcast sort of came from, really. To be totally honest with you, right? It was us, visiting sort of different aspects of Azure, and then realizing like what new stuff had been released since the last time we looked at it, and going, wow, the amount of what they Microsoft releases is just crazy. The speed it, which they change is unbelievable. So, no, but well done, Alan. MVP status is pretty insane
Thank
to
you.
get to, and I suppose we should probably extend that thank you out to the listeners, really, and the support that we've had from the podcast, because without people tuning in and listening, I suppose it may not have ever happened, right? So it's unbelievable. It's amazing.
Yeah, we wouldn't have been able to. I wouldn't have been able to. I don't think we would have continued doing the podcast if we didn't have people listening, because
Yeah,
it kind of would have felt pointless, I guess, in some form. But yes, thank you for listening, and hopefully we do get value from us. So yeah.
yeah, no. So well done, Alan. Yeah, and plenty more content to come from both of us. So yeah, amazing news. Okay, so this week, Alan, what are we learning about this week?
So we're going to talk about the Azure Private Link, private service, private endpoint sort of functionality within Azure. So
Okay,
yeah,
okay, great. And Alan's going to take us through. I'm going to ask as many probing and awkward questions as I possibly can. No, I'm joking. So yeah, we'll try and tease as much knowledge out of Alan's brain, because private link is definitely something that Alan is uh, reasonably
some of
familiar
it,
with. I would say, yeah.
most of it, not all of it.
Okay, yeah. No, definitely. We've definitely used parts of these services in production environments. So, but like everything else in Azure, um, it does much more than anything that we've ever touched with it as well. So, okay, let's jump right in then. So, Alan, can you just give us sort of a high level bird's eye view of what is Azure Private Link?
Sure. So Azure Private Link is a way to secure access. Secure access to Azure resources like that are platform as a service, or potentially a partner or service that is done by a company providing private access via an Azure virtual network. So instead of you having to go over the internet for it and um, on the services, lock down the firewall and things like that, and have to manage that. This provides a different way of getting to those services. So there's two parts to it, and one of them is the private endpoints, which is kind of the point where you sort of connect to, and then there's this private link service, which we'll talk about later.
Okay, so let me just ask a really sort of dumb question, right? If traditionally we might connect to um some sort of service via the internet, right? External access, maybe with like a firewall and access rules and front doors and X, Y, and Z. Can private link only be connected to via resources inside of Azure? Then is that the point of it, into Azure communication, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so yeah, it's bringing those, so if it going out to the internet, even if it is you're talking to Azure resources in Azure kind of thing. You kind of, I guess, from a network perspective, you maybe not leave Microsoft, but you come from an outbound or an internet facing endpoint, egress point into that service. So even if you come out of, in effect, come out of Azure slightly and then go back into it, if that makes sense. But from from an internet level side of things, so you've got to secure those ends. This is using Microsoft's backbone or the private link service to, in effect, talk directly internally with, like, in effect, I suppose it's kind of like a direct private connection to your service, whatever it might be, SQL, etc. And we'll talk about what the different types are later. But yeah, I think that's kind of the idea, that you're making it private, so it's not subject to the internet at all.
Okay, so in my simplistic sort of brain, if you had a virtual machine with two network interfaces, one would go privately and one would go publicly, or does it run in a different sort of, on a different
Yeah,
level than that, if that makes sense?
yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it, that you're hooking your platform as a service, um, you know, SQL directly into your virtual network. So you're giving it a new NIC to your VNet, your virtual network,
Okay,
and it has the possibility to go over the internet as well, that
right.
service. But
Okay, yeah.
you can then lock it down to say, I don't want it to go out to the internet. I only want it to go via a virtual network.
Okay, right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So you talked about two parts in that overview. What is private endpoint?
So private endpoint is the part that the user, the consumer, I guess, is the right way. The consumer of the service connects to, and that is it's an IP address or a NIC, private endpoint, sort of. It's called a private endpoint, but it's, in effect, it's a NIC on your one of your subnets that then points to, that then has a name of that service. So if you've got like your SQL, it'll be your SQL your SQL name that you've given it, and the DNS for it, whatever it is in Azure. I can't remember their file form, the format of it, but it'll be that DNS, and basically you can point to that, and then that will go directly to your SQL server or your file storage account, etc. To it. So it's the point at which you point everything to, or your access goes to that IP address, or IP addresses if it's a service that needs multiples, and then you go via that private link for it. So the benefit of this is that it's in a virtual network, which means then potentially, instead of your on-premise services, your access or your other cloud services that need to access that storage account or SQL, um, you can hook them up to a VPN into Azure, and then they can go privately over that VPN to that service without going over the internet. So again, that's another way of like protecting your connection, so you don't have to worry about exposing that service out to the internet, to Azure or to AWS or to your on-premise network. You do it over your VPNs, your network that you control with all your firewall rules, your NSG rules, etc.
Okay, we keep our NIC connected to our VNet as we normally would, and effectively what you're saying is that private endpoint then gets like plugged in like another NIC into that virtual network, and you've effectively got like another route that you can follow to that PaaS service, but you're not transiting via the internet. It's internal backbone of Azure. Is that how I've understood that?
To the resource itself, yes, but from then on, if you're going outside of Azure, so maybe you've got, I suppose the example is, if we talk about Azure Virtual Desktop, AVD, we want to talk to the storage account to do our profiles. We could potentially get our profiles to go over the internet, but and it would be SSL and things like that. But why? It kind of seems, if you think about it, it's all around latency for that, because you bring up your profile quite quickly to that machine. So there is potentially speed improvements that way as well. But you hook up the private, your storage account to the private endpoint, and then those VMs just talk to a local IP address to get it. The magic behind it, they don't know what it is, they don't know how to get to it, they don't have to worry about the internet. They just go straight to it. And in effect, you could build a service across multiple Azure resources. You can have logic apps, function apps, web app service, things like that, all talking on this local network that you can secure, because you could in effect say that no one can access that connection. It's all private. It might not be connected to a VPN or anything. It might just be that is your mechanism for all your services to talk across, but no one can access it because it's literally a private network there. So you haven't got to worry about people trying to decrypt anything in between over the internet. Those worst case scenarios where they're trying to decrypt a key or whatever, that's just not exposed to anybody.
No, I suppose it's only Microsoft at that point, isn't it? Right, because it's all in theory all
Yeah.
internal, right? So my thought is, so let me just get this in my head. Sorry, if I've got an IaaS web server, let's say my web server is an app service for a minute. I've got a web server that connects to a database of some sort, like SQL Azure
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. I connect my web server into my VNet. I connect my SQL Azure database into that VNet as well using private endpoint. Then I don't need to have any sort of public exposure of that database. And then maybe the other way around is if you transited via the internet, you could, which wouldn't be best practice. I would never set it up this way, but you could on the public egress, of the database server, you could basically, put the IP address of the web server and then just, talk to it directly, externally, if that makes sense. None of that happens now. The database can be completely disconnected from sort of any sort of public network access, and it just be connected into that VNet for access at that point. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
becomes like having a SQL server, a virtual machine SQL server being on that network, and you talking to it. You'll just, because it's platform as a service.
correct.
It's
Yes,
normally
okay. Yeah,
exposed internet kind of thing. You're now just in effect hooking it up like it was a a database that was on a server.
and that's why you're talking about PaaS, right? Because PaaS is somebody else's environment. It's not your VNet, is it? Right? In your environment. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, amazing. So we've talked about PaaS. What are sort of some of the services that support private endpoint?
So I checked this out because we only use a couple of them in the work we do, but there's 46 services that use it,
Wowza.
which is quite a lot. And quite a lot of it, when you think about it, kind of makes sense. So Azure Cognitive Services. So if you're, I think kind of what you were saying last week, the week before that, I can't remember, 2-3 weeks
Couple of
ago.
weeks ago, yeah, I think.
um, if you're processing a lot of data that may be sensitive, you don't want it to be it doesn't need to transit over the internet.
Correct, yeah, definitely.
It can go over this private link to it, so you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. And again, you might have services on premise that wants to access it, but you don't want to. Again, you don't want to expose it going over the internet at that
Yeah,
point. So
definitely.
you can go over a VPN from your on premise to Azure, and then into the VNet, and then it can access those services. So it kind of makes sense. So Azure Analytics. So this is log analytics. Azure Data Explorer. I think there's Data Factory in there. There's loads of things in there. But we use it heavily for or potentially for log analytics with Microsoft Sentinel, and bring in logs from on premise up via their VPN instead of going over the internet. So go via the AMA agent, Azure Monitoring Agent, and things like that. So that's one thing we use it for. Azure Functions, Logic Apps kind of all makes sense. Talking to local stuff on the VNet, or it processing, connecting to other data sources. Containers, database, like I said, the Azure SQLs and things like that. Azure IoT Hub kind of makes sense if you've got your IoT data going to it and you've got some stuff on prem, or however they connect somewhere to get it over to it. Azure Management. So potentially you can bring in your the Azure. So this is really talking around Azure Arc, where you're able to bring that service going over a private link as well, because you may not want to expose the endpoints you're talking to the internet to have internet access. So that's another reason why you might use private link, because you don't want to. You might have a domain controller, maybe you don't want to give it outbound internet to Azure Arc, which is using DNS. If someone compromises the DNS, then that you can get out somewhere, I guess. This brings it in house over the VPN, so you can protect that sort of communication. Storage, so Azure Files, blob storage, etc., and app service. That's the kind of high level ones there, because like under SQL, there's all the various SQL like types in there, and same with Azure Analytics and Cognitive Services. There's quite a few services in there. So, but yeah, there is loads, and which we'll probably talk about later. It can be other services that maybe a partner or a company provides, or even maybe what you might want to provide, and we'll talk about that later.
Okay, great. So how easy is it to set up? It sounds it does sound quite more advanced, if that makes sense, because just going out via the internet it seems maybe not the best practice, but it could be potentially a lot easier. Is it complex to set up?
So it's not. I'd say it's some services may be more complex than others. So Azure Monitor has quite a few endpoints you have to do, and a few extra bits you have to do to get it to work. It's not. I wouldn't say it's very difficult to configure. Most of it is sort of going through the portal and selecting some stuff. The things to think about is what network you want it to connect to, what is consuming that endpoint. Is it on premise? Is it just in that VNet? Is it in another VNet somewhere that you're peering from, and things like that? And you have to provide IPs for them. So for me, it's best to probably have a separate subnet for all your private endpoints for that service, so that you at least where they all are, kind of thing, and then you can give it like a big subnet if you need to, things like that. Because I think like storage account needed one IP, one private endpoint, so it doesn't need too much. But I think like Azure Monitor needed 5 or 6, because of all the different DNS names and things like that it uses. So you got to consider that. One of the main things is that it's all done based on DNS. So you can't just go to the IP. It kind of resolves the name of it to make sure it's valid to go down that private link. You can't just like throw an IP address at it. So you've got to make sure your DNS is correct. So in Azure and a VNet, then the private endpoint will create a private zone for the Microsoft service that it's redirecting in effect, and tell it to point to those IP addresses. Now, if you're in Azure, if you're using, you're redirecting your DNS not to the default Microsoft settings on your VNet, you're going to your domain controller, or maybe you're trying to get on-premise services talking to it, then you have to put those, you have to create those zones in effect in DNS or in your DNS service to tell it to point to that IP address. And that's done manually at that point. They tell you, the setup tells you what you need to do. So it's not like you have to guess it or anything like that. But if you're not using the Azure like default DNS on a VNet, then you've got to do it yourself in effect. So, but apart from that, generally it's not too bad. It's just really around the DNS side of things and make sure you get that right, because some of the services can only go to one endpoint as well. Like I think Azure Monitor, because it's just a specific service rather than your instance of it. Everything like Azure Monitor has to go to this private endpoint, and then it goes that's in that in effect that DNS environment, and then it has to then you can specify which services can talk to it on that that endpoint. But yeah, generally it's not too bad. And deployment wise, you can do it via Terraform. You can do it infrastructure as code. Me and Sam have done that, and it's Azure Monitor is definitely interesting, I think, to say the least, isn't it, Sam? There's quite a few bits to it, if I remember.
Yeah, but I think that is more of an advanced. I'll call it
Private
an
endpoint, yeah.
advanced scenario, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? Because that's like, but because we're effectively grabbing specific telemetry off of those machines, right, for various different
Mm-hmm.
reasons, right? But it seems like to me, if you had let's say you had a private Azure function, that you didn't want publicly exposed to the internet, I assume that connection would be very, very simple,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? Right? Because it wouldn't need anywhere near, if I was going to like, IaaS Azure, straight to that would be relatively simplistic, wouldn't it? So
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think you go. I mean, I'd have to double check, but I think you can go to the service itself and go, I want to add it to a private,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
a VNet. It adds it, and basically it creates the private link for you. It's that
Exactly. Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
trivial per
Yeah.
se.
Yeah. Almost. I know there's like billing tiers that are involved in some of these PaaS services, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure specifically for like logic apps, and I can't remember. Can a workflow logic app be connected to private endpoint? It can. It's
No,
standard
it has
only,
to
isn't
be
it?
a
Yeah,
proper one. Yeah.
yeah. So that'll be the same for many of the
Function
other
apps.
different function apps, and well, app service will be fine because app service is sort of isolated itself once you get past your basic tiers that you quote shouldn't be using in production. So okay, yeah. So that experience is relatively simplistic, and so because what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about like why you wouldn't do that, why you wouldn't do it, because it doesn't really, from what I've seen in my personal experience with it, it's probably less work to connect it if your service supports, like you say, from the portal private endpoint, just clicking a button to create the connection is like easier than modifying firewall rules and dodging around the outside of things, right?
Yeah, and you might be that. If you think about people wanting to um, access the, say, we'll talk about SQL because it always seems to be a thing I can think about. But say you had a, I don't know if you do this or not, but if you had a dev that wanted to access the SQL to do some testing against it, maybe, or doing some maintenance on it, they would have
Sounds
to,
dangerous, Alan.
yes,
But yeah, I
or
know.
even doing maintenance on it, running, connecting to it, and then
No,
updating the schema or whatever.
only messing. Yeah.
That I know, but they may have to connect to it directly, which means they're going to go into the firewall, open up a port temporarily,
Yeah. Sam's
do their
home IP
change,
address. Yeah, 100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then forget about it, and then the local, the internet provider redoes all the IPs and whatever, and then that's now someone else has got technically access to it. They may not know that, but um,
Yeah,
this in effect means
or even worse than that, like any
they
to
just
any,
open it.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seen
Yeah,
that. Yep.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just doing a change. Just open it for temporarily. Yeah, I'll close it. But this basically means that they can only do it via accessing the corporate network or going to, if they had a VPN, the Azure gateway in place, then they could just VPN to that and then access it or access all the services for that product kind of thing. So
Yeah, and
it's another.
if your networking is all centered around VNets in Azure, there's no like point to point VPNing or anything like that in place, is there? To make those routes, if that makes sense, right? It's not like you have to, VPN to the VNet and then VPN out to the service. It's just it's
It's there.
directly
Yeah.
connected in securely, isn't it? Right. So yeah, that's really powerful, definitely. Okay, so are there any other benefits of Private Link?
So we kind of talked about quite a lot of them. One of them, is privately accessing these services, which is kind of what we talked about. Allowing on-premise and peered networks to talk to them. So again, you can talk to other. It could be talking to your storage account privately from AWS or on-premise or GCP or other clouds or data centers, etc. It protects against, I guess, kind of against data leakage, and the reason for that is that you're not able to access any of the other parts of the service on that network. So because you're limiting it to certain services, it means you can't really access any other parts of it. So it might be that, say you've got your web service, you've got your SQL, things like that, and it's all on the same subnet, and then you've got a user that can then consume the website. I mean, you wouldn't do that; you tear it off. But say that was a scenario, then that user could technically talk to the database directly if they knew how to, and maybe firewall rules that were not configured correctly, things like that. This is saying in effect that actually that user can only talk to the service that you want them to, and then anything else could be connected other ways as well to it. So you're kind of segregating what users can consume or what your website can consume, because maybe you've got different tiering from the app itself, that maybe it can only talk to that database, and then that database is updated by other services, but it's not in the same subnet, VNet
Yeah, I see what you're
kind of
saying. Yeah,
thing.
yeah, because you're keeping everything, all of the um connected services, I'll call them, right? Like all those PaaS solutions, you're keeping them isolated and only doing those endpoints where you need them in the VNets that you need them. So, like you say, if you've got your public web server and that public web server is in a VNet, which is like your public VNet, it's not your public VNet, but it's what your public, services are connected to on the, on the VNet side. You've got a private link to that database. But then, like you say, if you've got like a cron job that runs every night, the box that runs that cron job doesn't need to be in that VNet, does it? It can be in another VNet, and it can have
With
its
a private
own,
link, yeah.
with its own private link to that PaaS resource, right? So you do get segregation. You can really granularly design your network infrastructure to really restrict access, and blast radius, right? Because
Correct, yeah.
if somebody pwns if somebody gets access to the web server, they could in theory connect to the database, um but they wouldn't maybe be able to then transit to other systems, if that makes sense, right? Because that cron job might run all it might be connected to 5 or 6 different systems, and it might be quite a,
Correct. Yeah.
highly connected application, if that makes sense in my
Yeah, and
theoretical
that
scenario.
cron job
Yeah,
could be in a private subnet that has no internet access whatsoever.
yeah,
That
exactly. Yeah,
it literally
yeah,
just is on its own. You can't even get to it.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, that seems really powerful.
Yeah. So another one is global reach. So I didn't know this, but in effect, you can add a private link into one subnet in, say, UK South that's talking to a service that is uh, in America, in West EU or West US, sorry, or East. Oh, I can't remember. East US,
US
yeah,
East, yeah.
US East.
Is
Sorry,
that how the way
yeah.
it's not East
No, it's
US?
East.
It's
Yeah,
East
it's East
US.
US.
It's East
Yeah,
US, isn't it?
yeah. I had to do this recently for a customer,
Yeah.
um, but yes, and it's just directly connected, so you don't have to create VPNs and things like that to talk to it. It's globally reachable.
Right. Okay. So these links
So
can transit regions as well.
yeah, I didn't know that.
Wow, that's
I thought it
insane.
had to be in the same region as
Yeah.
the service, but you don't.
Okay. So
So I guess that's potentially, you could potentially say it's going over Microsoft's backbone at that point. So latency and speed may be better than it going over the internet between the regions.
that would be my assumption.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I've never tested that, and
No.
you know,
But I think it's probably better off to say that that's secure global reach or private global reach, right? Because you're
yeah.
able to transit over Microsoft's managed backbone without having to set up anything there. Yeah, okay.
Mm.
Amazing.
Yeah, and the last one is, I kind of mentioned it before, is you can put your own services behind an endpoint. So if you've got a web app, things like that, you want to, that is a service to a bunch of customers, they can access it privately through their VNets to your service.
Okay. Amazing. Can I just ask one question?
Hmm.
Um, so the service is Azure Private Link, and we've spoken quite a lot previously about private endpoints. That's that's basically the mechanism that's
To
used
consume.
within Azure Private Link. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So yeah, you did mention, and this is why I asked this question, because you mentioned the Azure Private, no, the Private Link service. It's probably called Azure Private Link service.
Yeah, it is.
My
Yeah.
yeah, because just put Azure in front of
My
everything.
notes, don't worry.
um, Private Link service. What is that? Is that part of the Private Link product family? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so this is actually the service itself. So this is the fabric, I guess, that, or this is what's running the Azure Private Link service, is what's running on that PaaS service, if that makes sense. So that is the bit that is running on, that Microsoft is managing at scale for their, their storage, their SQL, things like that. But the Azure Private Link service is your version of it, where you can provide, like I was saying just now, your service, your web app, your whatever it might be. Um, you're able to provide that to a user, or to customers or partners, or whoever, privately via their VNets. So you've got like a multi, you've got a, I don't know, a scanning, a, I don't know, enterprise, an IoT hub maybe, that's collecting loads of data. I think it's probably a bad example. It's more of like, you've got a web service
Let's say
that
you had a
is,
third party that had some sort of API that you needed to privately connect to. Would that be
yeah,
what you would use it for?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, they have an API there. Instead of it being exposed to the internet, you can give people access via a private endpoint for your service. So not just PaaS services, but actually your own services, or you can consume customer services via it. which I think is very
When we say
powerful.
external, we're also talking external to the VNet that you're
The
currently in. So it still could be within organization, right? Like
Yes,
different teams exposing APIs internally to be consumed by other
yes,
teams.
yeah, without having to, I guess, without having to create VPNs in between to connect to it, you could create a VNet, a private link service, and then they could use the global reach to
Yeah,
connect to it from
yeah,
from other
yeah.
regions.
I'm thinking like APAC has got like APAC region has got some API to export its sales data from. Ugh, boring, but yeah, whatever. Right, not to the business. That's probably like most important part. But so APAC have got some REST API that they've exposed to share their sales data, and you've maybe got a job that goes and downloads it every day. I don't know. You could use the private link service to expose that API and then consume it from another VNet in a different region at that point without setting up a VPN.
Ye- Correct, yeah, and you get to choose who when users or consumers create their private endpoint for your service, you get to approve or deny them. So it's not just free gain and here you are. Because in effect, once you've created that private link service, then technically anybody could connect to it if they knew the correct resource. I don't know how the connection works. I've never done it. It's the bit I've never done, but
Okay.
they can connect to it, and then you'll see their connection, I guess, against a tenant, and you go approve or deny access.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Because I can see that as well. Because if you've got like, maybe mergers, acquisitions, and things like that, you may be even inside an organization, you might
Mm,
be multi tenant, right? And different, completely
mm.
different. Well, if it's different subscriptions, it's fair game anyway. It might as well just be a different tenant, I suppose, right? So yeah, okay. So how do you do it? How do you set it up? What is it?
So one of the main things you have to have for it to work is you need and I'm assuming there's premium load balancers, but a standard load balancer is the only one it works with. And basically, you just have a load balancer in front of your service, and then you in effect create the link, and it in effect does it. And if so, you have to. Yeah, there's a bit more to it than that, but there's things like you create. It has its own like VNet where you communicate. You basically telling the load balancer and the service what IPs it needs and where it's coming from, the natting. Um, and then it just creates that service through the portal, through other things, and then that service is there, and then you can give users access to it, and then the consumer then goes through, puts in the service ID when they create a new private endpoint. So you provide them with a service ID, um, and then it just goes to them, and then you get to approve or reject the request. The only thing that it says that it needs is that load balancer in front. So if you have got a web service, you just need to put a load balancer in front of it. To manage, I'm guessing it's because it's global. It's a global load balancer are global, aren't they? I think majority of the time. Is that right? No, they're not, are they?
I don't know. That's like
No,
front door,
it's
isn't it?
the traffic manager, isn't it?
Traffic manager is, yeah, not
Yeah,
load
yeah.
balancer, yeah.
But
Okay,
but
but
the load balancer is across the region, isn't it? So it's quite high up there on the network stack kind of thing within Microsoft. So having that there then is able to talk to the private endpoint service
well,
backbone,
it's
I
probably
guess, at
it's
that
probably
point.
what's in front of all of those PaaS services for Microsoft, isn't it?
Correct.
They should be
Yeah.
using they'd be using their own load balancers, I assume. So it would make sense that they would just expose it in the same way. That seems really powerful. Like, quite a. I suppose it's more of an advanced. The whole private link, um, like thing is a more advanced concept anyway, right? We are talking about like, you know, truly private, secure communications, right? Um, and being able to split across VNets as well, right? Because that's the other, I suppose that's the other thing, isn't it? Because
Hmm.
yeah,
Well, just thinking about it, and if you think about if you had your service all behind a private link service, all the consumer can see is the IP address for the website. They see nothing else. They have no access to anything else because all that private endpoint is talking to is your web service that you've specified. It can't see anything else. So even if you did it internally,
Yeah.
you
So it's
could literally
actually
put it.
it's more secure potentially than a VPN, isn't it? In some
Yeah, because you can't.
respects.
Yeah,
Yeah. I suppose you do have the trust element that private link is actually private with inside of Microsoft's backend systems, right? I suppose you don't control that, do you? But it does allow you to have better segregation, doesn't it? Which is probably a higher risk, I would have thought, if somebody gets
yeah,
access to.
yeah. Well, if someone compromises your end users, they can't see the back end. It's just an
Correct. Yeah,
IP address.
exactly. Yeah, it's not like that consumer is connected into that provider, whoever that is, via a VPN, and they've got like direct access to the VNet provider side, have they? They've got a specific
No.
tunnel. I'll call it a tunnel, like into that resource, pointed at a load balancer that is pointed at specific hosts for a specific workload, right? So
Mm.
you're really narrowing that access into there, right? So yeah, it does seem really powerful to me. Okay, so we talked about that we can connect to Microsoft's PaaS services with private link. um we've also now talked about that you can effectively roll your own private links and make your own private endpoints. Sounds like really good to me, but the question we always ask each other is Microsoft won't be doing it out of the good of their heart. So what will we have to pay in order to get access to these types of um, this type of functionality?
So I knew that private endpoint, sorry, wasn't too expensive if it did cost anything. But the private link service, so setting it up is free. So creating the service to make it available for people to consume is free. And I was surprised about that.
Well, okay, but before we get to that point, if you're consuming Microsoft's services, is that just completely free?
No.
No. Okay. So, but you're talking about private link service, you creating your own connections at
Yeah,
this
because
moment.
I
Okay.
think yeah,
Okay.
I
Right.
think in effect that's why I said it first, because the private link service is free to create a service, which then makes it the same as all the other
Got it.
past
Okay.
service
Okay.
kind
Sorry.
of
Yeah.
side.
Okay. Yeah.
So that part is free. So for a private endpoint, it is 0.009p per hour, which I think is around £6.60p per month, roughly. A quick calculation just now on that, which I think is too bad. And then you pay for your processing of data. So in effect, this becomes the same as outbound and inbound data, or outbound data egress of data to over the internet that you get from a VNet anyway. I think I don't know what the rates are. I've not compared that, but this is if you're transferring 0 to 1 petabyte of data, it is 0.0082p per gigabyte. So it's 0.8p really of per gigabyte of data if you're consuming a lot, which I don't think is too bad really. And it's 0.5p for if you're using 1 to 5 petabytes, but it's the same rate for inbound and outbound through that endpoint.
Okay. So internet egress from Azure out to the internet, right?
Which would be classed as accessing those other services technically,
In
because
theory, right? Because if you went to the
yeah,
public endpoint of a function app, then
yeah,
you are transiting, you're out to the internet, aren't you? right?
Yeah.
It's back to Microsoft, but it's out to the internet. So you get your first 100 gigabytes a month for free. So
Okay.
there's that to think about, I suppose, from a purely cost perspective. I'm not talking about best practice or security hardening or anything like that. But you get your first 100 gigabytes per month for free. But there's different pricing per what regions you're egressing from, egressing to as well. So if you're egressing from North America or Europe to any destination, so that would cover most of our use cases. It's 0.07. Well, it's basically 7 pence per gigabyte,
Oh, okay.
right? So 7 pence per gigabyte for your first 10 terabytes. We'll just call it that, just to make it easier. It does jump down. Like the cheapest is 4 pence per gigabyte once you've consumed over the next
You-
350 terabytes, right?
But that's still, yeah, still a lot
Cor-
more than
Correct, because we're talking about this is zero point 0.8 of a pence per gigabyte of data
for
transfer.
between 0 and 1 petabytes. Yeah, of data.
Exactly. And I think that's why, these numbers are so different, because if you do need to connect two systems together in Azure that do send a lot of data between each other, you do not want to be egressing to the internet, right? Um, the only thing I'd say though is what I don't understand is there's inter-region data transfer pricing on Microsoft's bandwidth page. So I'm not sure what you would use that for.
That's probably peering and VPNing, I expect, to the other regions.
But yeah, potentially, yeah. So that is uh it's just slightly more expensive basically than this. It's actually twice the price. So basically so you've got your £7 base fee to do the connection, and then each terabyte is, for that first petabyte, is about £8.20 in our money. So per terabyte. So it's definitely going to be cheaper than internet egress, right?
Mm.
But I also don't know how, uh, from my professional experience, I don't know how much it would cost to set up a point to point VPN. What would be the license on the VPN software? And then
Well,
how
if
would
you
you
if you
how
think
would you
about
transit that data in Azure anyway? You
well,
know,
if you think about the VPN gateway or the I can't remember the name of it now. But yeah, we'll call it the VPN gateway in Azure. The cheapest is £60 per month, and that's the basic one. And you
right?
need two of those. And then if you wanted to go, and that's basic, and there's not much functionality there. Really, you need to go up to the standard tiers, and that is going to be, I think, the cheapest one we were looking at the other day was £128
Right, yeah, because you
per
would just
month
use that,
each
wouldn't you?
side, and you
Yeah,
need to do that
yeah,
each side. So
yeah,
you're looking at £250 at that point.
yeah. So it's a lot cheaper than anything
Pro-
else, right?
yeah, providing your service can run like that. Yes, if it's a service itself, not that you're trying to connect to different,
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
like you won't be able to RDP over it or anything like that. It's not like that sort of link. It's more around the service itself. But yeah,
And all that pricing could have been made up because I just looked at it on the fly. So yeah, apologies if we butchered the bandwidth and pricing estimations there. But so what we're thinking of is, if you need a private connection and you're going to transfer a lot of data. I mean, the scales are completely different, right? We're talking 0 to 1 petabytes, and then we're talking about terabytes on the egress page. If you need to shift a lot of data, private link is probably going to be a really good addition to your infrastructure, right?
yeah, definitely the different going to different regions is insane, isn't it? Thinking about it after we just had that sort of scenario that we went through.
Yeah, is that inter-region pricing as well?
Yeah, there's no difference as far as I can see. That's just the price. There's different tiers after 1 petabyte. It goes down to 0.4p.
Yeah.
between 1 and 5 petabytes, and 5 plus petabytes is 0.3.
Yeah, so it's like it halves and then goes to like just over a third of the cost. It's just amazing that that would also be across regions as well. I'm not
Yeah,
saying,
that's what.
well, yeah, I know that's the pricing is the pricing. It just seems a bit too good. Like I could use Private Link to send petabytes worth of data from North America to Europe for zero point 0.8 of a gigabyte each. Why wouldn't I do that? Don't know. Maybe it's just amazing. I just well, the thing with cloud, a lot of cloud providers is they can sometimes get a bit of flack for bandwidth pricing. Right? It can sting you, can't it? We've seen it. Some workloads, if you were to have a traditional like co-located server or a dedicated host somewhere, you might just get an internet pipe connected to it, and everything in you know cloud environments is consumption based, uh, largely. And bandwidth is no exception. So sometimes you can have instances with certain workloads that don't make sense in the cloud because of those bandwidth price charges.
Yeah, I've just double checked the page again, and I'm not seeing anything say additional charges for cross regions or anything like that.
Okay.
It's just that's what I'm seeing,
No, yeah,
unless
no,
I'm
no,
interpreting
yeah.
it
I just,
wrong.
well, it's just like if you go to the bandwidth pricing page on Azure, right? There's like 15 different things you've got to look through and try and decrypt where data is going to and all of those different things. Private Link is just like, that's cool. We'll use Microsoft's connections and it's dirt cheap. And maybe that's just it. Maybe their peerings between their data centers are just so much cheaper than going out to the internet and coming back in, right?
Well, they're the provider, aren't they? I suppose they
I'm
don't
guess
have to go
I'm
through
guessing so. Yeah,
the different
yeah.
jumps.
That's it must be because it's like an order of magnitude cheaper. So no, it seems amazing. We need to private link everything, Alan. No, that's really good. Is there anything else that we've missed or that you want to cover, Alan?
No, I don't think there is. Like I said, we use it. We've used it for storage accounts for Azure Virtual Desktop, and we're starting to use it more for with our customers around Microsoft Sentinel and bringing data up privately. So
Yeah,
yeah.
no, it's really powerful technology, and it seems really fairly priced, which gets me concerned. Because usually, whenever if Alan and I are looking at different like infrastructure in Azure, we're like, oh, that's great, and then we'll look at it and be like, what was it the other day we were looking at? Something, and it was like £700 a month or something like that. I was like, oh, that's why it's that good, because it's
Oh,
it's
was it the hosts? It was the hosts, wasn't it? When you can buy a whole host in Azure,
yeah, that's it. Yeah, and no,
Azure
what
dedicated
was
hosts,
the
and you have to pay the Windows license on top.
yeah, and we want to. What's the Oh, wait there. I'm gonna just uh,
What you what are you thinking of?
uh, wait there a second. I need to um
You need it to stop bugging you all night.
service
Yeah.
bus. Service
Oh yeah.
bus, like globally, high availability service bus is like very, very, very expensive, and it's like, oh, this is great, this could do all these things, and then you go through, you look at the documentation, it's like, oh, it supports this, 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 and you're like, yeah, I want all of those things, and then it's like, here's how much it costs a month, and I'm like, okay, maybe I don't need all of those things because what Alan and I have to do a lot of the time is to work out like composite SLAs on infrastructure that we're building and how high availability and disaster recovery will be like handled. So you can pay people to take those problems away from you in that example of expensive service bus. But sometimes just the real world gets in the way, and it's not possible to reach those types of
Yeah.
infrastructure, unfortunately. So So yeah, no, thank you very much for that, Alan. That was a great topic, and yeah, really useful service that we use all the time. So yeah, really good.
That's all right. So Sam, what's the next episode?
Okay, so I'm doing the next episode on Azure API management. So if you've got APIs and you want to manage them no, and share them, manage them and consume them, sorry, I had to do that. Then this episode is definitely for you, especially if you've got legacy APIs that maybe weren't. No, let's say they were built with in a different era with different types of technology. API management can help you with that, especially if you're stuck in the SOAP world as well. So there's lots of functionality in API management that I'll take us all through, and try and apply some good use cases of where API management can help.
Cool. That sounds good.
Yeah, it's a very feature rich product. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We will have many more topics that we like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
We also have the ability for you to give some feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Do you disagree with us? Did we miss something? Did we butcher the egress internet out bandwidth pricing? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. You can do it via our link in the chat. That will take you to our contact page. But if you want to, you're able to leave us a voice message in the bottom right corner of our website. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you, or your messages. We'd love to hear it.
Cool. Thanks very much, Alan, and yeah, congratulations again on the MVP. Big achievement there. So well done. And I'll speak to everybody next week. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Take care. Bye.